Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Beyond the Cage. I'm your host, Jim Gramm, and joining me on the program today, we will have UFC strawweight fighter Cortney Casey. We will also look over some headlines in the world of mixed martial arts, preview Bellator 145, and of course, pick the main card fights for UFC Fight Night Sao Paulo coming this Saturday on Fox Sports 1, Dan Henderson against Vitor Belfort for the third time. As I mentioned, I am going solo today. I'm your host, Jim Gramm. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Gramm. My normal co-host, Billy Brandt, under the weather this week, wasn't able to go. Last minute this morning, had to call me and tell me that he couldn't do the show. That's one of the reasons why we pushed it from yesterday, Wednesday, our normal day, to today, Thursday, to try to accommodate Billy not feeling as well, but couldn't go this morning. So I'm just going on solo in lieu of trying to find someone on like 30 minutes short notice. So here we are on this week's Beyond the Cage. A lot of cool stuff to cover. But first, I'm going to get right into it. As I mentioned, Cortney Casey, she's all ready to go and queued up for me here. So she will join us here on Beyond the Cage up ahead of her fight at UFC Fight Night 79 in Seoul, South Korea. She'll be making her second UFC appearance, and she will be taking on Seo-Hee Ham. So Cortney, again, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, but let's get right into the questions here. And, of course, as I mentioned, this will be your second time in the UFC, but going back to your first time, you took that fight short notice against Joanne Calderwood in Scotland earlier this year in July. So just kind of take us through a little bit here of how you got signed by the UFC and, of course, the nature of then all of a sudden being thrust into your first fight on about 10 days' notice and having to go all the way from Hawaii to Scotland. You can kind of just explain that to our listeners a little bit here.
Well, I've been fighting for PXC, had 3 fights with them, and I was kind of on the UFC, radar, and I had been talking with Sean Shelby back and forth, and it was just kind of, they were, still trying to figure out what direction they're going to be taking that 115-pound division, if they're going to be adding more girls or just kind of waiting, because there is a lot of girls already in the division. So, he just said stay active, be ready. We always need replacements. So, my husband, who's also my coach, is just like, we got to stay prepared. We got to always keep your weight, good, just in case we get a phone call. So that's pretty much what happened. I was in Arizona visiting family. My sister had just had a baby, and so I went home, and I got the phone call at about 10 days out from the fight, but it had yet to still be confirmed if Beth was going to be out. She did have an injury, but they do have to get now doctor's clearances saying that you cannot fight. And if the doctor clears you to fight, then you kind of have to fight now. So they said that, it's broken, you can't fight. And they asked if I could make the weight, and I said, yep. And that's pretty much what happened. So it got cleared at 8 days. And then I literally went straight from Arizona to Hawaii, then Hawaii to Scotland, and then still had to do all the media, still had to get all my physicals done, my brain scan and all that stuff. So there's a whole bunch more going on than just, the media, the normal itinerary and cutting the weight. Like I had doctor's appointments that I had to go to. So everything didn't finally get cleared until literally weigh-in. So I wasn't ready. Still could have been up in the air. Who knows if I was going to be able to fight or not, but everything got cleared. My brain scan came back. Everything was good, and I made weight, and that was that.
Now, you just mentioned you had to fly from Hawaii to Scotland. Definitely not a short flight. Was that 10 or 12-hour flight for you?
I think it was like 13, and then plus layovers. Yeah, it was brutal. So it was Arizona to Maui, then Maui to LA to, I don't even remember where we went. And then, we went to New York, and then New York to Scotland.
Now, Cortney, is that the farthest you ever had to go for a fight?
Yeah, it's pretty far. I fought in Manila and Guam, but of course I was flying out from Maui, so those are only about 10-hour flights. So this is a bit longer, definitely a bit longer.
Now, with all you just mentioned, trying to make weight, getting ready for your first UFC fight, brain scans, physicals, all that stuff going on, media, were you able to do anything cool while you were in Scotland for the fight?
No, I didn't. Like we were kind of downtown. I guess you could say downtown. I really unsure of still the area that we're in, but I mean it was pretty busy where we were at. So I did get to. I mean, like when we went to go eat somewhere, and then after weigh-ins to go eat, you know, I got to see places, but no, I really didn't get to go be like a tourist or anything like that.
Okay. Now, your fight with Calderwood didn't go your way, but what were you able to take away from that experience, that being your first UFC fight?
I mean, I went 3 rounds with the number 9th ranked girl in the world, and I did it on 8 days' notice. And you know, I had a rock in the first, and you know, I think you know, like most people, I mean, if I had a full fight camp and everything like that, then you know, I definitely think it would have been a completely different fight. But you know, you just learn, you know, when UFC tells you, you know, can you make weight? We got to fight for you. You know, you make it happen and you put on the best show you can for the fans. And I feel like that's what I did.
Now, of course, you mentioned you've done training and currently still do training, not only in Arizona, but Hawaii as well. So what's kind of the split between training in Hawaii as opposed to training in Arizona?
No, I live in Maui full time. Me and my husband own a gym. So I pretty much do all my training up till normally about like 3-4 weeks out from a fight, and then I go to Arizona. And it also really depends on my opponent as well. If I can do my whole fight camp out of Hawaii, then I do my whole fight camp out of Hawaii. But you know, if I need to do a lot of Muay Thai and stuff like that, then you know I head down to Arizona so I can get in some work with Nick Chastain, who was my cornerman for that last fight and who's going to be my cornerman for this fight. So it just really depends on the opponent and really what I need to kind of focus on as far as developing my game for that fight.
Now, of course, as you mentioned, now training in Arizona, at least right now, for your fight here against Seo-Hee Ham at Power MMA and Fitness. And of course, a couple of the guys there at Power MMA, they're getting ready for a fight as well. Johnny Case, in fact, he's going to be fighting this weekend on the card down in Brazil against Jan Cabral. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts on Johnny's fight coming up here this weekend.
It's going to be a good fight. Definitely going to be a good fight. I mean, the guys over at Power are great. They train really hard, you know, very heavy on wrestling backgrounds and stuff like that. But, you know, they're no slouches when it comes to stand-up either. So, I mean, it's going to be a good fight. It's definitely going to be one to watch.
All right, another guy at Power MMA that's also getting ready for a fight. In fact, his debut at 145 pounds, and that is Miles Jury. So I was wondering what you thought about Miles Jury kind of dropping down to division and getting ready for his debut next month in Orlando.
He's looking good. Like, he's definitely looking good. It doesn't seem like the weight cut's bothering him by any means. He's still, you know, fast-paced. He's up and down very well. Again, most of the guys out of Power are heavier guys, so being able to work with those guys and be able to get up and be able to stand with them and take those guys down, I mean, it definitely gives you that extra edge when you are, you know, fighting someone at a lower weight.
Jim Gramm talking with UFC strawweight fighter Cortney Casey. You can follow her on Twitter at castiron_Casey. And now, Cortney, you want to transition from some of your training partners getting ready for a fight to you getting ready for your fight here against Seo-Hee Ham. And of course, as fans know, you look back over Seo-Hee Ham's record. She also has a common opponent, Joanne Calderwood. And does that fact that you have both fought Joanne Calderwood, did that make it easier at all to kind of break down her skills?
I wouldn't necessarily say that. I mean, again, you know, JoJo was coming off from the show. Seo-Hee's been out, you know, for about a year since that fight. She hasn't fought since that fight. She was scheduled to fight Beth Hyatt, as I recall, and then she got an injury. So, I mean, she's had some time to lay off. So it's really not focusing on like that fight or any of her fights. It's really just focusing on developing my game as a whole. But again, we do have to prepare for a southpaw. So, I mean, that's kind of pretty much what we've taken away from her fights is that, we're preparing for a southpaw fighter.
Now, looking back over her record, 13 of her 15 wins have come by decision. So kind of with that fact in mind, is that something you got to make sure your cardio and conditioning is on point? The fact that she is a fighter that is known for going the distance there, Cortney?
Again, if you look at the decision wins as well, a lot of them are second rounds because where she was fighting before, they only did 2 rounds. They weren't doing 3 rounds. They were only doing 2 rounds because they're so active over there. They're fighting like every couple months. So a lot of them are only 2 rounds that she was going. So I think it really depends. She does kind of have a Muay Thai style background. So, she kind of starts to pick up the pace as the rounds get, deeper. But, again, I'm really just focusing on my game plan and going to implement it the best I can and definitely push the pace. That's one thing that I really like to do. I wasn't able to show that as I normally do in my last fight with JoJo because it was, such short notice. But yeah, I definitely think that if I keep the pace going, I'll be just fine.
Now, looking in Ham's fight against Joanne Calderwood, started off a little slow, methodical, and then kind of eventually towards the end started picking up the pace a little bit. And as you mentioned, that is something you'd like to do, push the pace in this fight. But since she kind of is known for being a slow starter, is pushing the pace and just being in her face early and often something that you're going to try to do come fight night on November 28th?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, my game plan is to definitely start off strong and finish strong. I like to keep the pace, throughout the whole fight. I like to be in control of the pace. All my coaches are, you control the pace, you control the fight. And that's kind of the mindset I have going into all my fights, the mindset that I had since I was a kid. If you control the tempo, you control the game as far as when I was playing soccer and stuff like that. And that just crossed over into fighting as well.
Now, looking over her specifically against you, what area do you think she will pose the biggest threat to you in this fight?
I mean, her striking. I mean, of course, that's what she's known for is her striking. And she does have power. So it's something that you kind of always got to look out for. But other than that, I think I'll be just fine. But you never know because, I mean, like I said, she's been out for a year, so she could have developed a whole different game. You just don't know. So that's what I mean when you kind of got to kind of focus on yourself more than your opponent at sometimes.
Now, this time around, Cortney, of course, you will be once again flying pretty far for a fight, this time going from Arizona or Hawaii, wherever you fly back to first, then going to South Korea. But since you kind of already had that real long flight there going to Scotland, will that make this trip here to Korea, will that make it a little easier kind of having that experience of taking a long flight in preparation for a fight?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's going to be easier. It's definitely uncomfortable, being in a plane for that long, cutting weight and stuff like that. But I mean, it's part of the job. You got to do it. So you just kind of got to suck it up and watch everyone eat their meals in front of you, and you just kind of visually, pretend like you're eating and stuff like that. But for the most part, it's fine. You just kind of got to go and do it. It's something. I mean, you can't be like, well, I need a jet to get me there. You just got to take flight and deal with it, and make sure that you prepare your body for holding on to water weight, because that's what tends to happen when you do flies. You swell up a little bit, so you got to kind of play a little game with your weight beforehand. Make sure you're a little bit lower than normal, just because you are going to carry some extra weight when you get off the plane.
Now, for this fight, much like your last fight, you'll be taking on the hometown girl. Of course, you had to take on Joanne Calderwood in her home country of Scotland, now taking on Ham in her home country of Korea. So are you kind of relishing playing the role of spoiler, and are you expecting to hear a lot of boos come your way for weigh-ins and, of course, the eventual fight when you step inside the cage?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't bother me. They can boo all they want. It really doesn't matter. I mean, when you walk out there, you're kind of in your own little zone and stuff, so you just tune it out. But it's definitely good to put a little damper, in the home country. So yeah, I mean, I'm just going out there to do my job and put on a good show for the fans. I mean, that's all I want to do is make sure that it's an exciting fight, and I definitely think with both of our styles, I think that's definitely possible, that it's going to be a very exciting fight.
Besides yourself against Seo-Hee Ham, a lot of notable names fighting on the card for the first time in Korea for the UFC, including former lightweight champion Ben Henderson. Of course, you have Pride great Mirko Krokop will be fighting on the card. Also, Sexyama. Is there anyone in particular, Courtney, that you're looking forward to seeing in action when you fight there in Korea?
Benson, he's an Arizona boy, so I'm definitely looking forward to watching him. Sexyama, I guess too. He's definitely a seasoned vet. It'd be good to see his fight as well. But I mean, like you said, the whole card's pretty much packed, so all the fights are going to be good. So I'm excited to be able to watch those.
Now, when your fight takes place on the 28th, of course, is a few days after Thanksgiving here back in the United States. So I was wondering, are you disappointed that you're going to miss Thanksgiving this year?
Yeah, a little upset, but my husband and daughter are gonna pretty sure they're gonna save some leftovers for me. I like leftovers anyways. I really don't eat that much on Thanksgiving, so leftovers are better. So they said they'll save me some. As long as there's mashed potatoes and gravy, I'm good.
Now, of course, this past weekend, another holiday, of course, we had Halloween. So I was wondering, did you dress up at all or go out and get any candy?
No, I didn't dress up. I took my nephew to a haunted house, and he, let him go trick or treating for a little bit. But he's 9. He likes trick or treating and stuff like that. But he's a healthy eater and stuff like that. So he wasn't too worried about the candy. He was just more excited to dress up and go to a haunted house. And so we went home and we watched some scary movies, and that was about it. It was a pretty relaxed weekend.
All right, since you're now living in Hawaii, and of course you're going to a fight in Korea, you went to a fight in Scotland. My point being, the UFC going to all these new places for the first time, yet they have never been to Hawaii. So when do you think it's about time that the UFC has a fight in Hawaii, Courtney?
I don't know. I mean, there's talk that it might be, sometime 2016, but you never know. I mean, UFC is going to a lot of new places for the first time. So, they went to a couple last year and a few this year. And then, hopefully next year they add a few more venues to it. And hopefully, Hawaii is one of them. There's definitely a lot of Hawaii fighters, big support out there. So it's definitely possible that they do throw a show.
Now, I asked this question. We had him on the show last week, also from Hawaii, in Luis Smolka, and he told me that he hadn't seen the show, but I figured I asked you the same question because I just started watching the show myself, but that is Hawaii Five-0, the new version. I was wondering, obviously, being a native of Hawaii, have you watched the new show at all there on CBS?
I have not seen it. I really don't even have TV. We watch Netflix and movies. Other than that, like, we don't watch that much TV. So I have not seen it. I really haven't even heard that much about it from people at the gym or anything either. So I don't know if it's good or not. So can't really tell you much about that.
Okay, well, it is on Netflix if you are interested in checking it out.
It is?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I didn't know. See? I didn't even know.
That's actually where I started watching it, was Netflix myself, and so far I've enjoyed it. So if you do get a chance, I think it's definitely at least worth checking out. And obviously, if you do, I'd like to get the perspective of someone actually living in Hawaii to see if the show is depicted good or not.
Yeah, I couldn't either. I mean, if it's anything like the other one, I mean, I guess it's pretty hit or miss on episodes, I guess you can say.
Well, I think it's a little better than the original, but again, once you see it, you can form a better opinion. But let's get off of Hawaii 5-0, another silliness. Let's get to Reebok. The last question I'll ask you here. Of course, you had to wear Reebok in conjunction with your first UFC fight. So I was wondering, Cortney, did you enjoy wearing Reebok, and was that whole process, wearing the uniform and all that, did that go okay for you?
Yeah, I liked it. I liked all my Reebok gear that I got. Everything fits good. It's comfortable. They definitely, stepped up the quality of all their gear. Their shoes are awesome. They're probably now my favorite pair of shoes. But yeah, I had no problem with the gear. They had someone there too, making sure everything fit well, and if it didn't, they fix it for you. So I mean, they're pretty much on top of it. Again, I mean, they're new to the sport, so it's going to be a filling out process for the first year or so. Seeing what works, what doesn't work, what the athletes like and stuff like that. So, but as of right now, I mean, they're doing great. I think they took on a big role, and it's like I said, it's going to be hard to make everyone happy, but I think they're doing an awesome job of trying to accommodate everyone and make sure everyone's comfortable in their gear. And I have no complaints with the Reebok.
Once again, she is Cortney Casey. She will be fighting on the undercard of UFC Fight Night 79 from Seoul, South Korea. And it will be November 28th on the UFC Fight Pass. And you can also follow her on Twitter at castiron_Casey. It's right there on the screen for you as well. So, Cortney, thanks again for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to your fight against Ham come the 28th of November.
Thank you.
Once again, that was Cortney Casey right here on Beyond the Cage. Well, thanks again to Cortney for coming on the show. Hope you guys enjoyed the interview. We'll move along with the rest of the program here. As I already mentioned, I'm your host, Jim Gramm. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Gramm. Going solo today, my co-host, Billy Brandt, out. He is under the weather, a little sick, couldn't join me today, but I am still here doing Beyond the Cage. And let's move on from the interview there with Cortney, and let's get to a coverage of Bellator 145. And looking over at Bellator 145, known as Bellator with a Vengeance, it will be at the Scott Trade Center in St. Louis, Missouri tomorrow night on Spike TV. Features 2 title fights along with a couple of featured fights. The first featured fight I want to mention is Justin Lawrence against Emmanuel Sanchez. Very excited to see Justin Lawrence back in action for Bellator. He's a guy that was on the Ultimate Fighter live season with our good friend Darren Cruikshank. We also talked a little earlier with Cortney there about Miles Jury. He was also on that season. Al Iaquinta, Michael Chiesa was also on that season. So he's a guy that I think is very exciting, a guy that was very young when he was on the Ultimate Fighter. Obviously, that show was at 155. He's now fighting at 145. And he had a couple of fights in the UFC. Ended up then going to the RFA after being let go by the UFC. Won their featherweight championship. Is now in Bellator. And I think he's a guy that just has tremendous kickboxing. And I think with the guys that now at Power MMA, formerly at Alliance in San Diego, trained with the likes of Michael Chandler, Miles Jury again, and Johnny Case, I think this guy is really going to start adding the rest of his game, the ground game. And I think he's be a dangerous guy to look out for in this featherweight division. And so Emmanuel Sanchez definitely going to have his work cut out against Justin Lawrence. But I'm really looking forward to Lawrence following up. He had a pretty exciting Bellator debut, so I'm looking to have another great performance from him here in his second fight. Also featured in the heavyweight division, Bobby Lashley will take on James Thompson. Lashley's been pretty lackluster since going to Bellator. James Thompson's a guy that, he's a journeyman, 20-14 in his career. I believe he's now, I'm not sure if it says his age, but I think he's got to be in his mid-30s. He's been around. He has a lot of experience. Definitely can win, but I think I don't know if he can stop that power wrestling and do enough to keep Bobby Lashley off of him and get a win in this fight. But that one's probably the least I'm intrigued about as the feature fights go. This one, probably the best non-title fight on the cards. Much as I like Justin Lawrence, I think the quality of both opponents is great. As former Bellator lightweight champion Michael Chandler will take on David Rickles for the second time. This fight happened, I think, over a year ago. Michael Chandler finishing David Rickles very quickly in the first round, and I don't think that'll be the case here for the second time around. I think Chandler has shown some flaws in his game since losing the lightweight title to Will Brooks, mainly with his striking, maybe a little bit with his cardio and conditioning, kind of maybe flaming out there towards the end. So for David Rickles, I think you got to keep things tight, keep things technical. A lot of circling, using that good footwork and head movement that he is capable of. Maybe mixing in some leg kicks he's known for, but that could risk getting taken down. Obviously, that's probably what Chandler will look to do in this fight. So I think if Rickles can keep things standing, circling, kind of frustrate Michael Chandler, make him come after him, he might be able to land a nice counter or to maybe get a finish, but could win the fight that way. But if Michael Chandler is able to get in close, land a powerful bomb, or get in close and clinch and takedown, it will be the hometown guy this time, Michael Chandler, maybe getting another victory over David Rickles. In the co-main event of the evening for the featherweight title, Daniel Straus against Patricio Pitbull for the second time. Daniel Straus, I think, was on his way to winning the featherweight title the last time he fought Pitbull, but just fell short, went kind of for an ill-advised takedown that Pitbull was able to stuff. He was able to switch around, take the back, and sink in a rear naked choke to submit Daniel Straus to get the win. And that was a fight that Daniel Straus, at least to me, was clearly winning. His striking was on point. I think maybe being the southpaw or maybe the velocity or the speed of his strikes, I think was really frustrating Pitbull, who I don't think was expecting to stand that much with Straus at all, who normally is a guy that pushes people up against the cage, takes him down, and roughs him up that way. And I think that's maybe more of what Pitbull was expecting. So the second time around, I think he'll be more acceptive and not surprised that Straus is standing with him. But I don't know if that makes up for the fact of trying to figure out dealing with the speed and power of his strikes. So really, I think if Daniel Straus can do the exact same thing, just maybe not take Pitbull down late in the fight, I think he can easily win. And for Pitbull, he's got to try to figure out the southpaw there of Daniel Straus, because if he doesn't figure him out, you can't bank on Straus doing another mistake in a big-time fight. Getting to the main event of the evening at 155 pounds, Will Brooks against Marcin Held, the man from Poland. Will Brooks definitely the favorite in this fight, and for Marcin Held, as much as I wanted to win as a man of Polish heritage myself, he's going to have a tough test against Will Brooks, maybe the most well-rounded guy in all of Bellator. And not only that, he's just going to be so much bigger than Held, and Held is a guy I think could fight at 145 if he really tried. So I think Held's just going to have a difficult time trying to get this thing to the ground. He's going to have to try something crazy, pulling guard, obviously, maybe just diving for an ankle. He's going to have to do something crazy, because I think if this turns into a fight that stands on the feet for a significant amount of time, I just don't see Held having the skills to deal with Will Brooks. I really don't. And Will Brooks has proven that he can go 25 minutes, no problem, keep a great pace. He's very elusive, great technique, and a guy that is just hard to break his will. And no pun intended there. So Held's definitely got his work cut out for him, but the one thing that he has that's definitely better than Will Brooks is submissions, and he has proven that he can submit just about anybody in Bellator's 155 division. So if he can somehow get a hold of Brooks, he always has that possibility to pull a submission out of nowhere. But really short of that, I'm not really sure there's much he can do to worry Will Brooks. Before we get to this weekend's UFC action in Sao Paulo, Brazil, there's a couple of news and notes I wanted to talk about. Of course, Jon Jones reinstated to the UFC. Of course, that happened last week. Didn't really mention it, but want to mention it here this week because it kind of plays into the new fight night that they're announcing in New Jersey for UFC on Fox 18. And with Jon Jones being reinstated, that probably is why it led to this fight being booked in New Jersey come January 30th. UFC on Fox 18, as I mentioned. Anthony Rumble Johnson against Ryan Bader will serve as the main event and most likely number one contender shot for the light heavyweight division. Of course, many thought Ryan Bader may get the next shot in the light heavyweight division following his win at UFC 192 against Rashad Evans. against Daniel Cormier, who have kind of been, well, mainly initiated by Bader, but the two have had some words here in the last several months, even stemming from when Cormier was able to win the title over Anthony Rumble Johnson. So with Jones being ring-of-state and now this fight being booked, to me, it's almost a slam dunk that Jon Jones' first fight in the UFC will be against Daniel Cormier for the light heavyweight title. I really don't see it any other way. The only other fight I think would have been super intriguing for people is him against Rumble Johnson. But obviously, that's not going to happen yet. So when Jones will fight Cormier, I'm not sure. If their event that they're hopeful goes down to Madison Square Garden in April, if all that gets sorted out legal-wise, I think that would be a perfect place to reintroduce Jon Jones to the masses and also try to fight for the title that he vacated and now is in the hands of Daniel Cormier. So we'll see how that all plays out, or whether or not he actually has a formal suspension, or whether they're just they reinstate him, but he sits on the sidelines longer waiting to the fight. I mean, it could be all the way until UFC 200 until we see Jon Jones, which would be about 9 months from now. So that could be almost like a 9-month suspension, so to speak. So we'll see where that goes. But I think with them booking Bader against Rumble Johnson, I think it's a pretty clear message that Jon Jones will fight Daniel Cormier for his first fight back in the octagon. Also, speaking of fight news for the UFC, injury notice, Kelvin Gastelum was set to fight Matt Brown in the main event for the Tough Latin America 2 finale coming up here on the Fight Pass in just a few weeks. And Matt Brown had to pull out of the fight due to injury. UFC was able to find a replacement. Neil Magny will once again step up on short notice for a big-time fight, now taking on Kelvin Gastelum. He was supposed to take on Stephen Thompson coming up in December. That fight is now off. I'm assuming they're going to look for someone with Thompson. I'm not really sure who would be my hope, and I think this would be a tremendous fight. He, of course, had to pull out early this year with the fight against Eric Silva, which, again, the aforementioned Neil Magny ended up filling in. But if Rick Story can go, I'd love to see Rick Story against Stephen Thompson. If not, maybe Thompson will have to wait for another event, but I think that'd be a tremendous fight, Thompson against Rick Story. But Neil Magny, ups to him taking this fight on 18 days notice, and I think it's a great fight for both guys. Of course, Gastelum is trying to make 170 again, trying to make a run back in the welterweight division after having weight issues, and of course had his last fight at 185 pounds as kind of a punishment, so to speak. So I think that's a perfect guy to throw in there. Neil Magny is a guy that hasn't had any trouble making weight, a guy that is a consummate grinder, a guy that has great technique, great footwork, pretty solid wrestling as well. He's going to be a tough test for Kelvin Gastelum, who, again, they wanted to keep on this card, being one of the coaches of Tough Latin America this season. They really didn't want to cancel that main event, even though they would have had a great main event in Diego Sanchez against Ricardo Lamas as a replacement. But glad to see they kept Gastelum on the card, and we'll see if he's now ready to go for Neil Magny here on short notice. All right, let's get to the final segment of this week's show, UFC Fight Night 77. Vitor Belfort against Dan Henderson for the third time. Of course, these two first met all the way back in Pride. That is where these two first met in 2006, when Dan Henderson was able to defeat Vitor Belfort by unanimous decision at Pride 32. And they did not rematch all the way just until a few years ago. And that was in 2013, almost 2 years ago to the day, as this fight will be November 7th. It was November 9th in Brazil, where Dan Henderson just got blitzkrieg there by Vitor Belfort. In a minute 17, the first person to ever knock out Dan Henderson was Vitor Belfort. And since then, Dan Henderson has, of course, moved back down to the middleweight division. Vitor Belfort is coming off a very disappointing performance and loss to Chris Weidman for the middleweight title in his last fight. And even though this fight is in Brazil, I still got to wonder how much that fight against Weidman took out of Vitor. That's going to be very interesting to see. But I'll get more of a breakdown here on the main event coming up, as there's 6 fight here on the main card for this card down in Brazil, starting first in the light heavyweight division as Fabio Maldonado will take on Corey Anderson. Corey Anderson had a very nice win in his last fight, very dominant performance against Jan Blachowicz. Of course, maybe not the most exciting thing in the world, but got the job done. Maldonado, of course, was supposed to take on Rampage Jackson, then Steve Bossy, and then eventually did fight Rampage Jackson at UFC 186 and was no match for the former UFC light heavyweight champion. And I don't really see much he can do against Anderson. I think Anderson has really developed his stand-up game. I think it's pretty good. Go back and look at that fight against Gian Vellante. He showed it a little bit against Blachowicz, but obviously he's the much better wrestler and took that fight to the ground where he's known best. And that's also an area that Maldonado is not very good at. I don't see him really being able to stop the guy who's beasting 25-8 with the takedowns. And if it stays standing, Maldonado has a chance. He has a great chin. He's a tough guy to finish. But Corey Anderson, I just think is a beast right now. And, even though with the loss to Vellante, I think he's a guy trending up right now, whereas Maldonado is trending down. The next fight of the evening will come in the lightweight division as Gilbert Burns will take on Rashid Magomedov. And looking at Rashid Magomedov, he is coming in 3 consecutive victories in the UFC, starting off his run here with wins over Tony Martin, Rodrigo Dam, and Elias Silveiro in his last fight coming in December of last year. Now taking on Gilbert Burns. Will be interesting to see if that layoff almost a year will affect him at all. A guy that has a great record overall, 18-1, and so far has just really dominated all of his opponents. I mean, no one has really come close to beating him. His last fight, maybe not the greatest thing, but was able to get the knockout in the 3rd round at the 457 marker to get his first finish in the UFC. And he's probably a little more well-rounded than Gilbert Burns, but I think Gilbert Burns has been a little more flashier. He's 3-0 in the UFC as well. His last 2 fights, both winning performance of the night bonuses, as he was able to submit Christos Giagos back at UFC 179. And then earlier this year, he was able to submit Alex Oliveira by armbar in the 3rd round, a fight that he was actually losing and was able to pull out a submission there. So as far as finishing skills go, Gilbert Burns has shown more propensity to go and be able to get the finish as opposed to Magomedov. So I would probably lean towards Magomedov. I think his grappling and overall striking may be too much for Gilbert Burns, but with the layoff and his ability to get submissions, I don't think Gilbert Burns is ever out of fight, but I think this is a great fight of 2 young prospects here in the 155 division. Also at 155 pounds, we're going to get Peter Hallman, also from Poland, as he takes on Alex Oliveira. As I mentioned, Alex Oliveira, his last fight was against Gilbert Burns, and I'm sorry, his last, that was Gilbert Burns' last fight. Since then, Oliveira has able to kind of avenge that come from behind loss that he had by finishing KJ Nunes back in May, submitting him in the 1st round. And then he fought in June of this year at the fight night Machida against Romero, as he was able to take out Joe Merritt via unanimous decision. So he's bounced back very nicely, a guy known as the Brazilian Cowboy, now taking on Peter Hallman. I think the Cowboy here, the Brazilian Cowboy, definitely probably a better striker than Peter Hallman, who's had mixed results so far in the UFC, 2-3 so far in his UFC tenure, losing his last 2 fights, a split decision loss to Gleison Tibau, which did win fight of the night, and then he got knocked out in his last fight in June of this year in Germany, as he took on Magomed Mastevov, if I said that correctly, as he knocked him out in the 2nd round. So if it stays standing, I think Oliveira definitely has the advantage. I think he's going to be a little bit of a bigger guy against Peter Hallman, who's just 5'9". Oliveira lists at 5'11". But the submission and the grappling will obviously go with the man from Poland. And obviously with Oliveira already kind of losing one fight, at least in the UFC, by submission, maybe that inability to, or the ability to pull out a submission could give Hallman the win in this one, much like Gilbert Burns did not too long ago. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes out. But I think if it stays standing, unless Hallman's vastly improved in his stand-up, from his last 2 fights, he's going to have his hands full here with the Brazilian Cowboy. Looking at the next fight of the evening, moving from 2 fights in the lightweight division, we'll now get in the bantamweight division as Thomas Almeida will take on Anthony Burchak. I just think this is an excellent fight. Thomas Almeida so far has just about dominated everybody the UFC has put in front of him. First, by defeating Tim Gorman in a fight of the night performance, and then 2 more bonuses have come his way with an awesome knockout UFC 186 against Yves Joboy, and then just, even though it was 1 round, very exciting, close fight. He probably lost that round. Didn't matter. He comes back in the second and knocks out Brad Pickett, a very tough dude with a flying knee, to get another performance of the night bonus in his last fight at UFC 189. And this dude is just electric. Great stand-up, good takedown defense. I think he has good submissions. He hasn't really had to show it so far in the octagon, but a guy that is definitely on the rise up. And I think a guy that, if he can beat a talented guy like Anthony Burchak, may only be 1 fight away from fighting for the UFC bantamweight title. I think the dude's that talented, and of course, hasn't tasted defeat so far in his career at 20-0. And this guy is a absolute monster at just 24 years old, and he's taking on Anthony Burchak, who is no slouch either, the former MFC bantamweight champion, now 1-1 in the UFC. A lot of people were down on Anthony Burchak. He came into the UFC with a little bit of hype, like I said, former MFC bantamweight champion, gets submitted in his first UFC fight to Ian Entwistle, who I don't even know if he's still in the organization. He was able to regroup, come back 6 months later, and have a great performance against Joe Soto, who a lot of people were high on. Of course, he filled in on a day's notice to fight TJ Dillashaw for the UFC Bantamweight Championship. Didn't win, but impressed a lot of people and thought, man, if he actually has a full fight camp and dedicated to TJ Dillashaw, maybe this is a guy that can get back to fight Dillashaw for the title. But Anthony Burchak maybe dispelled that case, as he was able to knock out Joe Soto at that fight in New Orleans earlier this year, Bosch against Henderson, in the first round at the 137 marker. And I think proved that maybe that fight against Entwistle was a fluke, just the guy caught him. And I don't think it's really, that fight proved how good Anthony Burchak really is. And I just think this fight's tremendous. I know a lot of people are probably going to go with Thomas Almeida, but definitely look out for Anthony Burchak. I don't think he's going to be a pushover at all in this fight. Going to the co-main event of the evening in the light heavyweight division, Glover Teixeira will take on Patrick Cummings. Since kind of having a tough 2-fight losing skid against John Jones and Phil Davis, Glover Teixeira was able to bounce back earlier this year in Nashville, take out the hometown guy there in Ovin St. Preux with a rear naked choke victory, earning him fight of the night bonus in the 3rd round. Very good performance by Glover Teixeira, taking on a guy with a lot of hype and a lot of momentum, fighting in his hometown there in Ovin St. Preux. And looking at Patrick Cummings, he was on a very nice run after losing his UFC debut to Daniel Cormier, winning 3 fights in a row, being the likes of Roger Navarez, Kyle Kingsbury, and Antonio Carlos Jr. before running into the guy who had a lot of momentum heading into Glover, that being Ovin St. Preux. He bounced back nicely with a very dominant and nasty performance over Rafael Cavalcante at UFC 190, finishing Cavalcante in the 3rd round, setting up his fight here with Glover Teixeira. And really the key is, can Glover keep this thing standing? If he does, I think he has superior stand-up skills to Patrick Cummings. But if Cummings can get this fight to the ground, which is easier said than done, as it looks like really Phil Davis was only about the really guy to trouble Glover with takedowns. Normally he has really good takedown defense, a guy that is very capable of keeping the fight upright. But if Cummings is able to get this fight to the ground, Glover does have some submissions, black belt in jiu-jitsu, but I think if Cummings is on top, he has a very strong top game and could even finish Glover, I think, if he's on top long enough in this fight. But if it stays standing, this is going to be all Glover Teixeira. Getting to the main event of the evening, I already talked a little bit about it. Vitor Belfort against Dan Henderson for the 3rd time. Dan Henderson showed in his last fight that he's not done yet, as he knocked out Tim Bosch in the 1st round, just 28 seconds into the fight, still showing that he has something left in the tank. Vitor Belfort, of course, just didn't look the same against Chris Weidman in his last fight. Landed 1 or 2 hard shots, but it got taken down and just demolished by Chris Weidman, who, again, has just looked awesome in just about every fight, maybe except the Damian Maia fight. So was that just a one-off performance by Vitor Belfort, or was Chris Weidman that much better, or is this the beginning of the end for the man known as the Phenom, the former UFC light heavyweight champion? And coming into this third fight, I don't think it's going to be like the second fight. I don't think it's Vitor just running right through Dan Henderson in under 2 minutes. I think someone's getting finished, though, but I think it's going into the second round. I think Dan Henderson is ready for Vitor to come at him early and often, and I think we'll look to circle a little more and try to counter. Now, that doesn't mean Vitor Belfort still can't win. I think he has a little more tools at his disposal, especially with those nasty kicks that he can display as well. But seeing how the ground and pound went for Chris Weidman, I wonder if Henderson at all will try to shoot an early takedown. Despite being a former Olympic wrestler, typically not his MO to really shoot for a takedown and really press the action early with a takedown. But I wonder in this case, if he tries to do that, to really slow down Vitor Belfort and keep distance away from him. If he tries to clinch up close and try to maybe negate that power and explosiveness that Vitor Belfort is capable of. But Anderson, a guy that likes to bang as well, so he may throw strategy out the window and just try to bite down on his mouthpiece and hope one of his haymakers lands. So if that's the case, I probably would give a slight edge to Vitor Belfort. Either way, I'm very excited for this weekend's night of action. That will lead me to my picks here for UFC Fight Night 77 in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Dan Henderson against Vitor Belfort for the third time, rather. The first fight of the evening will be in the light heavyweight division as Fabio Maldonado will take on Corey Anderson. I think the wrestling game of Corey Anderson will be too much for Maldonado, so give me the man beast in 25-8 there in Corey Anderson. Next fight of the evening, Gilbert Burns against Rashid Magomedov. I really do like Gilbert Burns. I think he's a very intriguing prospect at 155. But despite the layup, I think Magomedov is a little more well-rounded, a little more polished. So I will take Magomedov in this matchup. But don't sleep on Gilbert Burns, though. Also in the lightweight division, Alex Oliveira against Peter Hallman. I think Hallman, he definitely has his back up against the wall. He has not looked good in his last 2 fights, but once again, fighting a Brazilian in Brazil, I think he has his work cut out for him. I think Alex Oliveira is a bigger dude, a stronger dude, and I think just a better stand-up fighter. I think we'll be able to dispatch the man from Poland here in this one. So give me the Brazilian cowboy, Alex Oliveira. Bantamweight division, Thomas Almeida against Anthony Burchak. Very tough fight. I do like both guys, but maybe I'm going against my better judgment here. I'm going to go with the upset. I think Anthony Burchak is a guy that is poised to make a run here in the bantamweight division. You know, I don't know if he can win a championship, but I think he's better than people are giving credit for, and I think he's not quite the heel hook. Maybe he's not quite that first-round finish against Joe Soto. He's somewhere in between. But I think he may surprise Thomas Almeida here. So maybe I'm going against my better judgment. But I'll take the upset here and take Anthony Burchak over Thomas Almeida. Co-main event of the evening, light heavyweight division, Patrick Cummins against Glover Teixeira. I really like Patrick Cummins. I really liked his performance in his last fight against Cavalcante, but I don't think he'll be able to consistently take down Glover enough to land nasty ground and pound like he did against Cavalcante. So give me the former number 1 contender in Glover Teixeira to win this one. Main event of the evening, Dan Henderson against Vitor Belfort for the third time in the middleweight division. I'm going with Dan Henderson. Maybe that's a little bit of an upset there, but I just really didn't like the way Vitor came out in his last fight against Chris Weidman. Now, while Dan Henderson is not Chris Weidman, maybe never was, but definitely at the stage of his career, being 44 years old, not like Chris Weidman anymore. But I just think he'll be ready for the blitz, and I think he'll be ready to take out Vitor later in the fight after overcoming the early storm. So those are my picks here for UFC Fight Night 77. You can also check them out on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage Podcast, if you want to look over that. And, of course, previous results and how I've done this year in the picks segment. And if you haven't liked our Facebook page, do already, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. As I mentioned, you can also follow me on Twitter at Jim Gramm. Also, if you're on Instagram, I couldn't get the name at Jim Gramm, unfortunately, but give me a follow on Instagram as well if you want to see some of my photos and whatever I'm doing there on Instagram at jgram1989. The letter J, not J spelled out or anything. So again, Billy Brandt normally here. You can follow him on Twitter at WBrandt21 as well. I want to thank our partners at MMAforlife.ca, MMAinsider.net, and of course, my good friend AJ Hiller, the CEO of MMA Signatures, #1 place to find MMA memorabilia in the world, MMASignaturesUSA.com, and of course, our friends at TopRatedMMA.com as well. Well, it's just me this week, so for me, Jim Gramm, thank you for listening to another edition of Beyond the Cage.